moment to have everybody welcome Justine Turner up to the stage for her talk, Who Owns the Story?
Hey everyone, anyone hear me? Yep. Alright. So today we're going to be discussing fanfiction. This is a topic I could talk for hours on, but to keep it within the time limit, I've just built it down to the idea of who owns the story. And that's because in our modern times, stories are locked into a copyright or an IP, and they're more owned by corporations. So fanfiction fills this gap between corporate ownership and the fans' desire to participate in the creative process. Oftentimes with the intention to rewrite, repair, and reclaim the story. Okay, so before we really get into this, I want to do like a short exercise. So raise your hands and keep them raised if any of these things have like happened to you. Have you ever been dissatisfied with how a piece of media has ended? I'm thinking like Game of Thrones season 8, right?
Yeah. Also
you know,
lasted hours of my life.
right. Have you ever like disagreed with a canon relationship? I'm thinking like Black Widow and the Hawk and the Hulk, right? Like that was just a weird thing that happened. Or felt like you missed something with like a time jump between seasons. These are all experiences that fan fiction can kind of fill those gaps in. So now, just to make sure we're all on the same page, fan fiction is any form of writing created by fans that uses characters, settings, or the worlds from existing media. And just to give a disclaimer, I will only be discussing like PG and PG-13 elements of this topic. I have no interest in out on the stage discussing anything else. Don't ask. Alright, so the reason that, to give a bit about my background and why this topic is so important to me, is like I've written and contributed to fan spaces for essentially my whole life. I grew up with the internet, so as soon as I got hold of any kind of like email address where I could sign up for sites, I was in fan communities. I've written on Wattpad, fanfiction.net, and Tumblr, and I'm so glad that Archive of Our Own, AO3 now exists, and I really wanted to be at 1 million words by the time this presentation happened, but I'm so close that I had to make this presentation. So fanfiction communities is where like I was radicalized. I grew up in a very like white, affluent neighborhood. So fanfiction is what exposed me to different communities and different perspectives. It's where I first learned about different gender identities and sexualities and helped me explore my own. And ultimately like come to the conclusion that I don't care about labels. Just being part of the queer community is kind of where I fall. But being able to write characters that are also experiencing, like exploring their sexuality as well, was a real comfort to me, and having these conversations within that online space without having to like, it's one of those things where it's easier to talk about a friend than yourself in situations. So this is why like fanfiction is so important. So fanfiction kind of bridges this gap of becoming like the folk tales of current times, because stories, especially like folk tales, used to be more like collaboratively written. We can trace changes through stories based on where they were told, because like they would change with the audience that was hearing to make it more relevant to them. Now though, stories are copyrighted and often end up with property corporations. Stories being copyrighted is a good thing because it does protect artists, their IP and all of their things that they created to make sure it's not stolen from anybody. However, they often get bought by corporations, and their corporations are looking to tell the story that makes the most profit, not necessarily to tell the best story. So there's often holes that are missed or risks that aren't taken in order for them to be more profitable. So this is kind of where fanfiction starts, is that it rewrites the canon material. And canon material is anything that's published by the person that owns the copyright. So Francis Coppola has done a lot of research into like the fanfiction's place in society and equates fanfiction to modern folklore. because it's stories that are passed from person to person and reshaped and retold across communities. This contrasts to corporate storytelling, where the stories are locked into that copyrighted text. But with stories being owned by corporations, they do adhere more to the sensibilities of the times than, like, the sensibility of the time of when they were written versus, like, the sense, instead of what makes sense in the universe that they've created. This has always caused strife with fans, and they've always taken it upon themselves to fix it. Fanfiction has always existed. The internet has made distribution easier, but since texts have been published, people have taken it upon themselves to then write more. But like pre-internet, one of the most well-documented and preserved fanfiction communities is in the 1960s Star Trek mailing list. So a bit of a side note, sci-fi used to be like predominantly like women's genre. So it was like mostly these women who would pass around designs and comics. Some of them centered around the very dreamy Dr. McCoy, who was in a lot of like westerns at the time. But then most of them were actually about how Spock should be canon. Spock is the relationship between Spock and Kirk, of course. So first, like props to Star Trek for they were very progressive, especially for their time. They did feature the first interracial kiss between Aurora and Kirk. However, in a world where people eat replicated meat, essentially making everyone vegetarian, in a moneyless society, there is no reason Spock and Kirk should not have an endgame in every single universe. They follow the traditional enemies to friends to lovers, and essentially they should be the power couple of Starfleet in every iteration of them. So this is actually where Henry Jenkins has done a lot of his research as well. As fans poach meaning back from corporations by coming to different conclusions than the original text. And this can be done in a lot of ways by swapping roles, changing endings, and exploring different relationships. It's a way for fans to assert their ownership. So here's some of the most popular alternate universe, so AUs, that are used on AO3, Partner of Our Own. And then just an example of how tagging works from a Star Trek perspective. So we have Angst and Fluff and Hurt Comfort are all essentially the same thing, because you just want your character to hurt and then you also want them to be okay. And you want to right them. So then by having this space to explore these different ideas, you see the repairs happening to the original work. And I think one of the biggest repairs that we see in fanfiction is this diversification of characters, especially from the original. So corporations are typically trying to appeal to the biggest marketable audience. So this often leaves them with a cast that is majority cis, het, white, able-bodied, and oftentimes male. Even in settings like the middle of New York, where it would make more sense for there to be more diversity, and there's not. There's in this scene group one Black person, and it's the middle of New York. So now just fanfiction helps to explore and add diversity to these groups and settings. Now some of these have become canon as they become more popular, and corporations have been doing a better job of making things more diverse, especially in spin-offs and in the original comics with a little bit more diversity, specifically Clint Barton having pyramids. Fanfiction does though allow for more opportunity to explore these topics. Since you don't have to follow the standard plot or arcs or pacing of anything, you can just take a slice and really explore how day to day this would affect him and how these might change relationships and the story as a whole. If Tony Stark had helped him with the hearing aids, what that kind of conversation looked like, and so on. Another really popular one that gets changed is Harry Potter. There is a lot of other issues with Harry Potter, obviously with the creator, but one of the things that gets changed a lot is the lack of diversity that happens. And so a very popular change to add diversity is to make Hermione Black and then to make Harry also some version of a person of color. This is often cited as one of the reasons that the Percy Jackson series was able to cast such a more diverse cast. There's Annabeth in the books, is blonde and white and just very smart. I think I'm glad to change any part of her character. They received a lot of good reviews on this as well, but it is cited in a lot of fan spaces that because Hermione being black was such a popular tag that it helped push that to have representation in the new shows. So fanfiction also explores different gender identities and sexualities and repairs the queerbaiting that happens, often used to market shows. So queerbaiting is when a show is marketed to have a gay relationship at the center, and then these characters never get together. Civic, or they end up dying in the 15th season. Ridiculous. Specifically Supernatural. This wasn't a strong. So fanfiction allows for characters to overcome their doubts or any miscommunications. That's clearly only in the show to stop these relationships from getting together. And it allows, and then when writing about it, it allows for an outlet for the audience to project themselves into the characters, and it allows for situations to play with your own identity as well. So another thing fanfiction kind of does and allows to explore is, I specifically see this in a lot of teen dramas. This is Shadowhunters, as a good example, is allowed to. I feel like teen dramas always pick the wrong main characters because they're just the most dramatic and make the dumbest decisions. But the side characters are usually where it's much more fun to see. So specifically this one, the older brother, Alec Lightwood, has a coming of age story and a coming out story and getting together and has a very healthy relationship in general. And so fanfiction allows for shows to be shown through the eyes of the side characters. And personally, I like writing this and then a show's end, and so you get to see them kind of continue on with their life and have a family and how that kind of lives, which is always really nice to have that happy ending. Because fanfiction also changes, it can help change the endings to give the beloved characters just a better start. And while sad stories are important as they offer an emotional outlet, it's nice to have the fan communities to help continue that grieving process, either by writing an alternate universe where everybody lives and no one dies. And in this case, we have Bilbo Baggins and Thorin Oakenshield live through the end, either with Bilbo staying in Erebor to help Thorin rule, or Thorin returning to the Shire, both of which are very fun ones to read. And then for me, honestly, it makes the rewatching scattered because you have this idea of what could have been, and you can also explore in the moments of a character dying, you can explore what the other characters are feeling and going through, and you kind of have a deeper understanding of it. So and that kind of leads into this idea of where fanfictions for coming stories kind of stems from, because it allows for a more personal exploration. Henry Jenkins goes as far as to say that fans circulate stories to make meaning, and since you don't have to start from scratch with making characters, the setting, certain plot points, writers can then focus on themes they want to reclaim, like loneliness, belonging, grief, strength, identity, community. And since the audience also recognizes all the characters, setting, plot, etc., it takes less writing to make your point known and to elicit that emotion. You know the moment that Thorin is dying on Raven's Hill. So you can just start there. You don't have to do a backstory, you don't have to write all of the characters, you don't have to come up with anything. You can just say what you want to say about it. And in this way, because you can write all these things, Sarah Pugh calls fan fiction workshops for all, as they are training grounds of a democratic space where anybody can write. And ultimately, fan communities come to an agreement on certain lore. A lot of the time, naming characters that appear a lot and filling in background information. One of them being styles in Teen Wolf through the character. Like one of the main characters' dad is in most of the episodes, and he's just called Sheriff. The fandom has named him because he's just a basic white man. And that's just who he is. And it's really nice to have that kind of lore. Like, oh, you know who this is. So ultimately, like these fan communities can kind of come through and to an agreement on what's going on. And so like copyright law then like threatens fan fictions. Sorry. Copyright laws have always threatened fan fiction because it's been around. Like creators have sued fan fiction and writers for as long as there's been fan fiction writers. That was basically up until recently with Archive of Our Own, which is why that was such like a big deal, because it kind of got to a point where it's been like accepted within the full community. Because up until like very recently when Archive of Our Own came out, it was very common to have like disclaimers at the beginning of fics declaring who owned the characters, which is on the screen, which was very funny to me. And AO3 makes it more legitimate because it stores and tags and protects communities. And it was even called like a rogue archive by Abigail Costin, as it rebelliously preserves the cultural memory of the media, where a corporation only preserves like the copyrighted content, and then the fans, through like this archive more like the cultural moment that surrounds it. Right, like I'm thinking specifically like in Captain America, we nicknamed it Captain America's ass, right? That's not preserved anywhere by the corporation, right? Like there's some interviews that have referenced it, but only because in the fan spaces it became so big that it needed to be referenced in traditional media. But that's a big thing. Rebecca Tushnet then says like fan fiction is a way for fans to push back against like the copyright laws and to build that space for the culture to thrive despite the like corporate boundaries. And that's where we ended up with Archive of Our Own. It's a fully volunteer-run space, but it does house and operate as a full archive of everything that goes on. So then I come back to the question of who owns the story. Corporations, they do own the content, they do own everything that's published about it, they own the copyright, and they own all the content. That is part of what fan fiction needs to have. To not have, and to not make any. But fans own the community. They own all of the extra lore that comes out of these spaces, and by doing that, they like assign meaning to like the works and what that specific piece of media ends up meaning to like the culture as a whole and what it ends up saying. And they own like the surrounding culture that goes with it as well. So these are all my references. I highly recommend him. He's been writing about fan fiction the longest, really. Anyone else? Questions?
I didn't even know this was a thing.
Welcome.
So that's pretty cool. Are there, like, I think you alluded to a couple instances, but like, do the people that own, like, I don't know, whatever storyline, Star Wars, like, the people that own Star Wars, do they look at the fan fiction universe where these stories reside and draw inspiration and ideas? Is there overlap?
Yeah, so there's actually a lot of, so fan fiction is also like a spot where like a lot of writers get their start. So there's a lot of books and series that have been developed post, like a fan fiction got really popular, and so they changed it enough to no longer be the original IP, and now it's a published work on their own. Victoria actually was saying that her library might be doing a whole like book list of all books that started off as fan fiction in the coming months. So keep a look out for that. Yeah. Yeah. I don't know how far along that is, she just mentioned it to me.
Yeah, it's like grassroots.
Yeah. Okay.
2 questions.
One, are there any, obviously, probably the under rules about fan fiction, right, what mine, are they not to cross? Particularly, it's sort of, you're talking about corporations.
Yeah, they're not to make money. That's basically the line.
But I mean, so that,
Let me maybe just ask a question. Because, you know, the kind of corporation, yeah, we can all get on board with things. But I thought that if it's not a corporation, and it's a fiction writer, and they have a particular point of view, and the fan fiction writers differs, like where does the line?
You just don't have a popular pick, right? Like, so you post it into a community saying your point of view, and people either read it and like it or they don't, you know, based on your point that you find. Is that
With respect to the writer?
like the original, like, creator?
Yeah.
There's nothing. You can write originally. There's a lot of people that will say, as long as you don't use, like, they don't real people, is kind of where that is, but you can use someone's character however you like.
So it's no states. It's legally allowed, but it's
I mean, there's things that I don't like. Like, you know, but I'm not gonna go like shame anybody for what they want to do with the fictional character.
I was thinking like a particular writer could have a particular take on LGBT issues.
Yeah, so fan communities typically are more accepting. So it's typically in bad taste if you make someone like homophobic. You know, you're less likely unless it's trying to like push forward a storyline of like the main character. So like if you make their parents more assholes, you know, or if there's like those. But that's like the focus is on like a character coming to terms with themselves. You know? Is that kind of where you're?
Yeah, we can call it. Second question. What is the legal status of the fiction? Like, if you're writing this fan fiction that's a copy of somebody else, can somebody, what if somebody wants to copy that person? That's
Yeah, so in like the fan community, it's more you want to like reference that you were inspired by a work. So if I wrote a fan fiction that was essentially the same, but so like someone wrote a coffee shop AU where like Spock and Kirk meet in a coffee shop instead of Star Trek, right? And then I basically take the same one and like switch who's the priest and who's the customer type of thing. I would then say this work was inspired by that. It's kind of the manners that go along with it and the etiquette, but you can do what you like.
that's a word, maybe etiquette.
Yeah, etiquette is, there's like certain etiquettes where it's more just making sure that people that inspire you get credit, but it's not like a hard and fast rule, like you're not gonna get kicked out of any spaces. You can get some angry comments if someone was really popular.
Is it, the website that you referenced, I assume it's a website, the archive of our own, is it something like I can sign up for? It's hypothetically, I had some Doctor Who fan fiction or a certain.
You laugh, that's a very popular thing, everybody else is getting it, like, yeah.
So I can sign up and publish that? Okay.
Archive of our own, you do, like, there's like a waiting list. So you have to like sign up and then like you get an email in a couple like weeks for it, because they try to like limit how many people. But you can go on and suggest for it. Like you can all pull up your phones and go on Archive of your own. Know the tags you're looking at though. Is my recommendation to move it on? Paul?
So are you aware of cases where fan fiction authors have been sued for copyright infringement?
Yes.
And how did that turn out?
Usually you just take down the fic, and that's all like they really want because they're a big like Tolkien has done it a lot. You know, like the estate of Tolkien has done it. Like Anne Rice has done it like throughout all of history. It's kind of gotten to a point now though that there's been enough cases that it's more of as long as you're not making money off of it, because then there's no damages to the original work. Whereas like it's the same with like Disney, right? Like you can't use like a Disney character in your own business, but you can use the characters, you know, if you're just like drawing for yourself.
So you're saying the legal status is that it is copyright infringement, but if you don't step on too many toes.
Yeah, so like legally, there is nothing wrong if there's no damages. So if you're not making money off of it, there's no damages to the corporation that they can say.
Couldn't they argue that you're depriving them of their ability to write that story?
They could, you know, but again, they
They have to work with a lot of people.
yeah, that would be a lot. Yeah. They can. I haven't heard anything specifically like that, and archive room exists, so I'm assuming other people much smarter in the law than me have figured that out, and that's okay.
I've never heard of this before.
Well-
I don't know anything about it. So, just let me say, all right, you have famous story, let's say, I can't think of this famous story right now. The one with, from the south with, well, just pick a story, doesn't matter. Okay, so this story,
Okay, what did you-
copyrighted, somebody wrote it, got a movie made it, it's famous.
Yeah.
So then, what is fan fiction, and where does that writing occur? The only writing I say anything about is on Facebook.
Mhm.
So I don't understand where does that writing take place? And how does everybody know where that place is to write about being a fan of that work?
So, a lot of people Google like what they want to read is a way, and usually archive our own will pull up. Tumblr was always like a big space for these communities to exist and like writing to be published. Reddit's a big space for it as well. We have lots of Reddits, either different relationships that people want to talk about that are fictional, right? Like Liz Mockingbird is, the one I have in my head right now. Then there's Twitter has them on there, so Blue Sky. They're all kind of places you can discuss and find them. On Archive of Our Own, it's like really easy like search function because I know that's best. Where you just like pick a tag you want to like search, like Scarlett O'Hara, right? You can just
That's
put
the movie I was thinking of.
it is.
Yeah, purple.
Gone with the Wind, yes. So if you want to type in the search of Gone with the Wind, you would get all of the fiction that's been written already that has been tagged Gone with the Wind.
Yeah, so remember, she referenced Star Trek, and that was pre-internet. So people were writing fanzines at the time, and so there'd be fan clubs.
Where do they have these fanzines and fan clubs?
People
There's
felt
a mailing list.
addresses. There'd be the president of a fan club, and that would be like the hub for sending things in. Or they would advertise at the back in the ad section of sci-fi. The ad, all the things that you would think to get, people would know to read, to then send in, and they would get on mailing lists because they got other regular magazines. So
That's
it's
just like
been
their
around.
name on it. I wasn't even just showing you my username.
Yeah, so it's been around long. In fact, I think it probably, so like even Tolkien had fandom even before Star Trek, and stuff like that. So people have been writing fan fiction for a very long time.
I mean, there's fan fiction,
Yeah.
about the Bible, right? Like there's fan fiction about, Shakespeare's things.
Yeah.
What's the point of writing about it? Why don't you just read the story and...
Because you scream at the text and you go,
How dare Spock and her not be together?
yeah, no, it's
I
and then you just want to face it. Or whatever it is, but these characters become so beloved to you.
How dare
You
George
just
Orwell
like-
die?
Well,
The ultimate die.
Right, so then who owns it? It becomes then so part of you that then you want to rewrite it. So that's,
How many musicians have songs about Ophelia, right? On Taylor Swift actually. Now that's fan fiction. Basically, she can create Ophelia, but she
It's inspired by
participated in the imagery of that.
Thank you.
I was kind of about to what they said. At what point are they covered by satire law? With the whole lawsuits and all that stuff, where's that? I know you don't know a lot.
Not alone. I don't really know what that line is. I do know that as long as you don't make money off the work, they're not going to sue you. Like, it used to be very much like, we would put like disclaimers on all like fan fiction. I don't own these characters, I don't own the setting, anything you recognize is not mine. The only thing I own is, the new things. I own creative process was essentially what that disclaimer was, and that covered a lot of people for a long time. I also only know it from studying in like early 2010s kind of thing. So I don't know before then either. But I don't really know what that one is. I just know the general don't make money on it and will be fine.
Quick follow-up, is Wicked a fan fiction? Kind of.
Wasn't it? Yeah, it's off the Wizard of Oz. I think they got permission to use it. They got it from the original Wizard of Oz estate, like to make the free lots of the wizard.
50 Shades of Grey was fan fiction of Twilight.
It was. It was a very bad fan fiction. But it did start there, and so they changed enough of it where you don't recognize that main lead analyst as Bella, and you don't recognize Christian Grey as you don't recognize.
I have a Justine question.
Oh,
So you have your stat sheet up there.
Yeah.
You have written almost 1 million
on
words.
Archive Book.
And then how long has Archive of Rome been in existence?
So it's been in existence since 2009, I think. I've been on it since 2018.
So since 2018, you have written 1 million words of
No,
fiction.
I think it's been that long.
Has it?
Yeah.
Like I said, I've only gotten on since 2018.
I mean,
It
that's
could be longer.
amazing of writing. I have only
It is.
written 1 million words in my entire life.
Yeah, and that's on that site. I've been writing. So yeah, which is why I was like, oh, I'm so close. It was the goal this year to hit 1 million, but I might not hit it.
So very cool.
So do you write them, Justine, or another person writing?
You read a book,
And you don't like the ending, or you don't like the way the character was developed, and instead of just saying to yourself, well, that's that author's thing, you can write your own book. Then you go on some site and you change the whole story or change.
Not always the whole story, but sometimes there's a miscommunication plot that doesn't make any sense that needs to be corrected. Or there needs to
In
be
your eyes, it needs to be corrected. And so that's how fan fiction came out. You want to change.
Or you like the characters and you want to write something, but you don't want to go through all of the hard work of creating your own characters, creating your own plot, creating your own setting, finding an audience for it, and you just enjoy writing. Like as the creative hobby. Some people like knitting, some people like to draw, right? No.
most of them are TV series.
Most of mine are TV series because they're rough.
Well, thank you.
Some.
You mentioned earlier about your self-discovery, and I've been on AO3. You don't have to answer this 100%, but what were some of the influential works that made you discover your career in this?
So I grew up with being like super good luck. So that was Supernatural, Doctor Who, and Sherlock kind of time frame. All of which have primarily like two male lead characters who never got together. Not Doctor Who, but like that is still a sci-fi entry point. And so it was more of a, oh, these people are struggling, and then there was a couple of other like female ones that like went through something. Once Upon a Time for a while, with those two, and I was just like an oblivious teenager, and they were describing what a crush was, and that helped me recognize what was going on. It's like, oh, I like her, as well as him, kind of a thing. So it's just more of being an oblivious teenager and having someone describe what feelings are.
Another Justine question, if you're willing to share. I'm just curious, like, what your entry point into fan fiction was. Like, how did you find the community? Because this, aside from story itself, is something it's also about the community. Sorry, I'm very like naive about this.
Yeah. So again, I grew up when like Harry Potter was just finishing coming out, like the book series, and I grew up when Twilight was just coming out, and like middle school time frame. So like those two were like big books for me. And I don't know if any of you remember, but Twilight, Stephanie Meyers had published what was going to publish out of his perspective, Midnight Sun.
I read that.
Yeah, it was bad. However, it got leaked, so it wasn't coming out. And 13, early teens disappointed me. Needed to go find it. I had heard rumors from a friend that it's online, and so I searched for the ending of Midnight Sun. And come to find out, what I found was fan fiction of someone finishing it.
That's awesome.
Right, so that is what led me on to that was, in general.
Yeah, I was in my 20s when I wrote that.
Yeah, that was, right, like, that was, I had been on Tumblr I didn't really like have a social media presence, and I wasn't like broke like strangers, don't tell people anything about it. Say things like on the internet, well, I'll just read other people's stuff and I'll write about other things, or just read that thing. So I was following the rules, no person. Alright.
Any other questions?
Any questions for you?
Thank you, that's great.